Chapter 2 of Part 3. Nicodemus. Jesus was a light that could not be hid. The more thoughtful had begun to study the phenomena of his character and career. Even members of the Sanhedrin began to take interest in his teachings, most with feelings of aversion, a few with solicitude, and one at least with kindly inclination. That one was Nicodemus. There must have been others whose observation had led them to desire to know more of Jesus. Such was Joseph of Arimathea, who became a disciple, but secretly for fear of the Jews. See John 19:38. How many more men of mark were in this circle, we have no means of knowing. John says in 12:42 that among the chief rulers many believed on him. Of these we take Nicodemus as at once the leading spirit and the representative man. He was a Pharisee as to faith and a member of the Sanhedrin as to position. He had all the traditionary influence of his sect and his office to bind him to propriety and conservatism. He was not young. The Talmud speaks of a rich Sanhedrist called Nicodemus Banai, who at a great age was alive at the destruction of Jerusalem. And that's the reason why we can say this maybe was intentional working in of that, or it could have been Nicodemus of around 150. And anyways, there are no means of identifying this man with the Nicodemus spoken of by John, but there is no reason, so far as I know, why he may not have been the same. The Nicodemus of the Talmudists is called son of Gorion, is represented as one of the three richest men in Jerusalem, living at the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, being then among the disciples of Jesus. Olshausen refers to Sanhedrin, folio 43:1, Abbot Rabbanathan, chapter 6, tract Gittin, folio 56:1, and so on. This Nicodemus came to Jesus by night. The interview is reported condensedly by John, but is exceedingly interesting at showing how ready Jesus was to set forth the most profound doctrines to any willing mind, even when that mind is still held in bondage of old prejudices, timid, afraid of the ban of his caste, holding tenaciously to his prejudices by force of habit, yet candid, loving truth, seeking a sure footing cautiously. He felt himself bound, as all honest minds are bound, to give a fair hearing to every new word and an impartial examination to all new claims. Jesus had not yet classed, as he did afterward, the hypocrite with the infidel, the Pharisee with the Sadducee. He had not repeated with emphasis the denunciations of John the Baptist, but his style was not such as would be pleasing to the Pharisees, and they did not know how far he was to advance his claims. They regarded him, therefore, with mistrust. Nicodemus saw more in him than most of the other Pharisees perceived, just as was the posture of his mind when he determined for truth's sake to have an interview with Jesus, but for the sake of prudence to have it at night. Now, people are definitely afraid of the good with the bad being, the guilty stirring up something that would get the innocent killed. So one definitely understands that with the Romans, or other groups more recently write, let us now examine the narrative in John in the true historic spirit, laying aside the dogmatic prejudices of education. Nicodemus calls Jesus Rabbi, the title of respect to an acknowledged leader. His opening speech is complimentary but cautious. It gives a sufficient reason for his coming and implies a careful guarding against admitting too much. We know that from God thou hast come, a teacher. Who are we? It was not confined to himself. It is noticed that the phrase we knew is the current characteristic formula of the proud Pharisees who held the key of knowledge for themselves and held it from the common people. We shall meet it frequently as we proceed. And we see how some of the Jewish traditions to this day are kept within not only their communities, but the elite of their communities in different ways. There would have been no propriety in such stately official mode of expression in a secret nocturnal interview. He was representing others as well as himself. What a very few others, like Joseph of Arimathea, were ready to admit, and what Nicodemus thought. The whole Sanhedrim at that time in their hearts believed. Here is a discovery of the impression already made by Jesus upon the most elevated and thoughtful minds of his nation. We know this much, that thou hast come from God, that thou hast a divine mission to the people as a teacher. Only that no more is admitted. They are not carried away by any enthusiasm in his behalf, but they are stimulated to learn what he can teach them. He must not be elated by this admission, for it is qualified by a logical reason. For no man can do the wonderful things thou doest if God be not with him. Well, this gospel of prosperity thing, one way or another, well, God being omnipresent, sure, but not, your ability, your lack of ability, your wealth or lack of wealth isn't exactly proof. And certainly now we know that people have more, the word magic came because people, derisively, like stage tricks and stuff, because people started using stage tricks and claiming religious powers for having them. To what does all this amount? Not very much. It implies that while the chiefs had made no high estimate of John because John had performed no miracle, Jesus had made a profound impression upon the rulers. One is sent or comes to examine his claims privately and dispassionately. He says we, very generally perhaps as Steer thinks, to shelter himself from expressing his own convictions and so as to be able to draw back if necessary. Thou hast come is in Greek a pointer to kamenos, the coming one, and if Nicodemus use a precisely parallel word in Hebrew or Aramaic. Aramea is what you see in that term, and it only really became Hebrew in the Talmudic period, but in one of which dialects the conversion must have been maintained. He might have seemed to involve a recognition of the messianic mission of Jesus, which recognition, however, is immediately withdrawn in the word teacher, the Messiah expected by the Jews being not teacher but king. Not really, because definitely that religious role was still there. He further proceeds to thin out his address by the phrase, if God be not with him. So, external things aside, that's where the importance lies.